Hey everyone, I'm Carrie Beck with Homeschool Coffee Break, where we help you stop the overwhelm so you can, oh, I got it, so you can actually take a coffee break. Today we are talking about a topic that I know y'all have heard me talk about a lot, leadership education. And so Heidi Christianson from Lemmy is here and we're going to dive right into it. So thank you for being here, Heidi.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
So we are going to be talking about leadership education, and she works with LIMI, which is Leadership Education Mentoring Institute. We were just talking about what a mouthful that is, and so that's what she does, like all the time. So I'm really excited to just hear your perspective on that. Before we dive into the topic, could you just tell people a little bit about yourself?
Definitely. Yes, I have five boys. They are all grown now. Um, my youngest one graduated last year, and I homeschooled them for 23 years. And before I did that, before kids, BK, um, before kids, I actually taught at the university and at the community college level. And I knew I wanted to teach, but I never thought I would teach kids because I did not have a good experience in public school. Um, but when I went to enroll my oldest, I got the paperwork and I just couldn't do it. At that point I had toddler twins and a newborn, and so I put him into a private school, but with that many kids already, there was no way I could continue. So when our twins were ready for kindergarten, we jumped into homeschooling. And even though I had such a horrible time in the public school system, I found myself falling into that track and those habits. And I wanted my kids to love learning, but because I was, especially with my experience in education, um, I still was falling into those, bad habits. And so my fourth son, I like to say he's not my problem child, but he's the child that made me a better mother. And because of that, he kind of fought me on the traditional education. And I knew that I was the one that had to change. You can't ask your kids to change in that way. They're kids. So I started doing research, and that's when I found leadership education, and I just loved it. One of the things they talked about in a foundational book, the Thomas Jefferson Education by Oliver DeMille, he talks about how everyone is a genius, and I just love that. I love that idea, and I love that leadership education is about helping kids, really as parents and educators, we're looking at our kids as, they are geniuses, and it's just our job to help them find it and nurture it. And so that when they are adults, they can go out into the world and share that and lead out with that, to help the world. Um, so anyway, I for years was going to Lemmy training and learning more about it. I eventually was asked to become a trainer for them. About that same time, I also was getting my teaching credential here in California, so I could teach for a charter school. So I am a credential teacher. Um, I did eventually stop that because I found the education was getting in the schooling was getting in the way of the education for my students, and I didn't feel like I was um, in integrity with what I knew was right. And I decided to leave, and I had I have my own business called Realizing Genius, and then I also am the director of operations for Leadership Education Mentoring Institute. I've been in that position for it'll be 3 years in October, and I love doing that because it really combines my passion for helping people see the genius in themselves and others, um, and um, and taking education, that leadership education principles, and sharing them more broadly. So
That is so cool. Yeah, I think a lot of us were introduced to leadership education through a Thomas Jefferson education. When it first came out, my friend Andrew Pudewa of IEW, he came over to my booth and he was like, "Carrie, you need to start selling this book." And so anyway, that was sort of my beginning towards all of it because I don't know if he ever did, but anyway, so when we're talking about leadership education, tell us sort of what you explain what that is and what that would really mean for a family and how it's more than just a curriculum or a checklist.
yeah, no, it definitely is not a curriculum or a checklist. I actually uh, the uh, the owner, the founder of Lemmy, and I wrote a book called The Learning Zone, and it's about leadership education and applying it in your like in your co-ops and in your homes. And one of the important things I feel it's just so important for people to understand is that idea of what leadership is, because too often, I know my oldest son, he was about 12, 13 years old when we started in leadership education, and I was all excited about it. I was trying to share it with him, and he was a very sensitive kid, and he just started crying and saying, "Mommy, I don't want to be president," you know. And I think also the Thomas Jefferson education also really focuses a lot on statesmanship. And I feel that statesmanship, that idea, is wonderful, that leadership idea, but too often that term is used for politics. And that is not what leadership education is about. Leadership education, I'm just going to quote our book. It's not about titles or positions. True leadership emerges when someone learns to navigate challenges thoughtfully, see patterns in human behavior and systems, and guide others towards positive change. It's about developing the capacity to make a meaningful difference, whether in your family, community, or the broader world. So, one of the things that was really important to me, why I was adamant that that had to go in our book, is because I feel that women who choose to stay home and homeschool their children, they have an incredible impact on the world, and they are leaders. And too often, when you focus just on like statesmanship, and you don't really define what leadership is like we did, mothers don't see themselves as leaders, and they really are. I know. I was so blessed. One of the last things my father said before he passed away, um, uh, he said to me, is that he was just so proud of me and homeschooling our kids, because he could see how homeschool, all of these women that were homeschooling, all of these families that are homeschooling, because dads are in there too, they're changing the world. He saw homeschooling as, you know, the panacea, this what was going to solve the world's problems, because we were teaching our kids to think outside of the box. And he was only seeing how I was homeschooling, so that's, with that leadership education edge to it, rather than, just sitting a kid in front of a computer, which I know that sometimes all people can do. And it's a great step, but leadership education takes it, a little bit farther, because it's leadership education, because each person has their individual genius. We need to individualize education for them. And that is really what I love about leadership education.
So good. And I really appreciate you reminding people that not everyone's going to grow up to be president of the United States or CEO or even on this church elder board or something. But just like you said, moms are leaders and dads are leaders. And I would say 99% of the kids of the moms listening to this are going to grow up and be a mom and a dad, and they need to know how to lead well, and they do. I mean, moms have such a big impact, especially ones that stay at home with their kids and all. So thank you for sharing that. I think we, because of our society, we've sort of belittled some of that, and we don't value. I mean, there's so many memes out there now just talking about, well, how much do you pay someone to take the job of a mom? And yet we feel like, it's not as important. So, well, if we're talking about leadership education, how would someone shift their thinking in the way that they would homeschool or in the way that they would parent? Because like we said, it's not a curriculum, it's not a checklist. How do they shift, and what kinds of things might they start doing?
Well, I think one of the biggest shifts is how we see, I mean, what our goals are. Because too often, I know as a credentialed teacher, and one of the reasons I stopped working for the charter schools is that as a teacher, we are looking at, checking off those boxes and all of those standards. And um, as a mentor, which is something that we look at differently, a mentor looks at the child, the student, and sees where they are, where they need to go, and then helps them get there. And so that's a big thing is, we're looking at where do they need to go. And for every single child, that will be different. For every single person, it's slightly different. And yes, they need to read. Yes, they need to be able to do math. But, some kids need to do, statistics and calculus and all of that. And some kids don't. And that's okay. Um, I'm not saying that math isn't important that's not what I'm saying at all. It's just we have to look at the child before, above the standards, above any of these other things. I feel it's really important that instead of looking at, okay, what does my fifth grader need to know? Instead of looking at something like that, it's more of where do I want my child to be when they are 40? Okay, so don't even look at, okay, getting them into the college that they want to get to. Instead, look at what do you want them to be doing when they're 40? And I mean, I used to say 30, but now my oldest is 30, so it's kind of but at 40, what do we want them to be doing? We want them to be living their genius, sharing their genius with the world. We want them to be reading books and discussing them. We want them to be writing effectively and persuasively and challenging ideas. And so that's where we want to be. And so if that's our goal, then especially when they're young, when people are starting out in homeschooling, the most effective way to do that, to get to that goal, is to help our kids love learning. And that is, it can be a real challenge, but especially when we're bombarded with all of these curriculum choices. And it's so easy to just say, oh, give me the box and I'll just follow along with the script. And but like I said, my fourth son did not go along with that, and he did not want that. And so we had to change. And then, I mean, I have 5 boys, and you would think that, I'd be able to just use the same thing over and over again. But even even within Lemmy, which Lemmy, what we do is we actually train parents and educators to be mentors and to mentor different projects. And project-based learning is something that Lemmy brings into the leadership education realm. And it's just so effective in helping kids be motivated and to see the value of what they're learning and to individualize it as well. But anyway, my youngest son, my 4 older sons are still voracious readers, but my fifth son is much younger. There's like 7.5 year difference, and I was just tearing my hair out. How am I going to get him to read? And my four older sons loved fantasy um, and science fiction and all of this. And my fifth son, I'm like, okay, why isn't he fitting into the mold? And this is after so many years of doing this, but it was like, it was so easy to try and like just force him into that box that his older brothers had built. And um, and he read a little bit later, but once I figured out what he liked to read, oh my gosh, he took off. And I mean, he is so well read. I it just amazes me, but it took him a little while. And it was funny because we were driving, we belonged to a homeschool community, and we would meet weekly for classes and things. And I was doing a lot of research at that point, and I would listen to books in the car. And so he started out, they were like self-help, like, The Teenage Brain, by Frances Jensen and things like that. Something, a teenager probably wouldn't really want to listen to normally, but he started out, with his earphones on and listening to his own stuff. And then it was like, okay, take one off. What is she saying? Then it's like no earphones, and then stopping the thing and say, oh, Mom, let's talk about this. And that's how I figured out what he liked to read. And then it's like, okay, let's get this stuff. And he loves psychology, economics. It's amazing what he will read. And but it had to be individualized for him. And I had to continue to search. It took me a little bit longer because I was still had that idea of what his brothers liked and expected him to like that. But nope, he's his own kid, own person. So
So good. That sounds like my son is our youngest, and he knew how to read. He could, like read something, but he wasn't interested in it. And I really struggled for a long time. I tell people, as long as it had water in it, like Robinson Crusoe or Swiss Family Robinson, I don't know why he would be interested, but he didn't really like to read. He's 32 now, and he loves to read, and we share different titles. And you're really right. I love that. I just want moms to say, give your kids grace and patience, give them time, and give yourself grace and patience, because sometimes it takes some time to figure out for each child what is best for them. And then I also like the other thing you were talking about. I was just talking to one of, it's a dad, they're just starting to homeschool. We were on the phone, and I was like, think about like what do you want your kid to look like? And now I said like when they graduate, but I love this idea of 30 or 40, because he's like, these are some good things to think about. I'm like, you got to figure that out, then you can figure out what you're going to do this year in your first year of homeschooling. And I think that is so important. You've got to know where you're headed. So you've mentioned this word mentoring, and I totally believe in mentoring our kids, modeling and mentoring. Can you tell people a little bit about what that would look like in real life or a real
sure.
homeschool? Just an idea here or there. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just focus on parents mentoring with
Yes.
yeah. So a parent as a mentor, you are as I said, for my youngest son, I was not looking at what he should be doing each year by grade. Okay, I was looking at, okay, what does he need today? Um, and so I kept looking for those different books. Um, another thing I'll tell you about is actually my oldest son, a story. And this was fairly soon after we had just started homeschool, using leadership education. And our twins, both of them, they're very different, but both of them are musically gifted. And
Oh,
so one of the reasons I started homeschooling was I wanted my kids to have the time to learn music and how to play an instrument. And so I had all my kids in music lessons, and my oldest came to me and he said, I don't have a mission. I don't have a genius. My brothers are, better than me in this. And he was just, he was a young boy, and that's all he could see. And so I had this idea of, they had to do music. And as a teacher, I would have just kept him in and say, oh, you can do it, you can do it. You need to do these different things and you can't stop until you've reached this goal. As a mentor, what I did is I actually looked at him. What was why did I want music in his life? I wanted him to have that experience of enjoying music and sharing it with others. But I did not want him as an older brother to feel that negativity about music. And so I realized as a mentor in my mentor role that it would be better to allow him to stop the music lessons. And but I couldn't just do that. I also had to sit down with him and talk to him about, okay, what are you good at? What do you feel is part of your mission here on earth to, your God-given mission to share with the world? And so, I mean, I actually sat down with him and I pulled out family albums, that was, you know, like I said, he's over 30. And so we didn't have all of the uh, cell phones and stuff, of all the pictures that way. So we took out the family albums and we looked at them and I could point to him. I said, look, here you are. You're like 3 years old and you're already telling your brother's stories. And he still does it. He is a master communicator and that is his genius. And so one of the things that basically kept me sane while I had all of these little boys at home was I would put on audiobooks and stories at lunchtime. And then it was a break between, it's like, the mommy, 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 constantly calling and needing me, because I have twins, I have friends who have twins as well. And it's like, oh, I have, the dual sound or whatever. And I say, no, I have surround sound, everybody's talking to me. But I'd put on these audiobooks and they'd stop and police themselves and be quiet so they could listen. And one of their favorites was a guy named Jim Weiss, and he's still out there. I love his books. He does abridged stories, and he has them for all different ages, and he shares the classic stories, which I think are so important. But anyway, I was able to get my son into a workshop, a local workshop with Jim Weiss. And I mean, talk about, starstruck. My son was just like, oh my gosh, this was someone he had grown up with. And it was wonderful. But it was that as a mentor is what I had to do is I had to, basically I saw where he was. I saw what he could be. I had that glimpse of what his genius was, and I needed to share it with him and give him opportunities to develop it and share it with the world. And that's really what mentoring is about. And you do it, whether it's, taking your kids to the grocery store and, sharing little bits of information there. It's like, oh, can you find this? And I know for my youngest son, one of the things I've done with him is once he got to that hard age of 17, where it's like, oh no, I'm going to be an adult and I don't quite know how to do it. Um, as a parent, or as a teacher, I could say, okay, well, you have to do this, this, and this. But as a mentor, I could see that one of his things that he was very concerned about is that how would he literally survive on his own? And so one of the things I did actually made my life, it was win-win, is I just gave him a couple $100. I said, okay, you're in charge of three dinners a week for the month. And, here's $200. I keep the basics stocked. If you need anything else, you need to use that $200. Anything left, and it's yours. And so he got really creative. So it was not only a way of him figuring out how to kind of, use what we had. It was a way for him to put some money in his pocket, but he also had to learn to go out and budget and figure out recipes. And my husband and I have never eaten better. It has been so wonderful. And he feels so much better, my son does, because he knows the next step forward. He knows he can go and live on his own when the time is right.
I love that. I remember when my girls were younger and well, all my kids learned to cook, but it was one summertime and they each had one day a week and they to cook dinner for everyone. One time I was actually I was in Houston with my dad who had had open heart surgery. They were up in Idaho and my middle daughter was probably like 15 or 16 and she calls and she's like, Mom, how can I fix if I cut the sausage up and it sort of burned, if I add some oil to it, is that going to fix it any? And I'm just like, I don't know that real. I mean, here I was, and that was before like this was like the old-fashioned cell phones and everything, but still they have to try. And sometimes they're going to be successful and sometimes they're not, but you're there to sort of walk alongside them. So I really do appreciate that. And I think I'm going to steal your idea of audiobooks at lunchtime because I was like, that is brilliant. I used to sit right here at this table and we'd done our school and they're eating. And so I would read aloud. But my problem was I'd been up since 5 or 5:30 and I'd start to fall asleep. And I'm thinking, Carrie, you're telling your kids, you're modeling that reading is boring because you fall asleep. So the next year we completely revamped. I did not read at the table anymore because I'd always go, well, you're here. Y'all finish reading for me because I can't seem to do it. But okay, so let's talk in closing a little bit about, so let's say we have a mom here and she's hearing this and she's excited, but she's also overwhelmed. What's like one simple step that she could take to just begin leadership education in her home?
Well, one of the things we do offer a free online course, and it is available on our membership website. It's lemmy-u.com. It's lemi-u.com. And that is one way to learn more about leadership education. But right now, the best thing I would say is the first step would be understanding that you are an example to your kids. And so what that means is probably, we talk about learning environments in our book, and example is the first one. And in order to help you connect your students' heart and mind and purpose, showing them you doing that is the best thing to do. So they need to see you reading. I mean, just like you recognize that you couldn't read, when you were falling asleep, you need to show them that you are reading as well. They need to see you writing or at least hear about it. And so I would highly recommend starting like a journaling routine for yourself. And one that I have found very helpful for myself and for other homeschool moms is it's based on Benjamin Hardy's book, Gap in the Gain. But every week I will write down my gains, everything that has happened, all of the positive things that have happened for the week. Too often as homeschool moms, we have these elaborate plans that we're going to do, and then something better comes along. And then you look at your list of goals for the last week and it's like, oh, I didn't do anything. And that's the gap. You're looking at the gap. Instead, look at the gains. What have your kids learned? And I know sometimes for me, when my kids were little, it's like at night, I would like, okay, what went well? What worked? What what did they learn? And sometimes it was just, well, that mommy can say she's sorry and it's okay. Grown-ups can apologize. And, that's an important thing to learn. So being that example for your kids is just so important. And so, yeah, just start doing, being that example. This is what you want your children to do. to be doing when they are adults, be that adult that you want them to be.
That's so good. And it covers so many areas of our whole life. And I think one thing that Heidi's also reminding us is you need to start with you. You don't need to like go, oh, here's leadership education. I'm going to make my kids do all of this because you've got to change. It's got to be internal for you before you can share it. In other words, you may spend several months just working on you and becoming maybe a better reader or a better writer or have better character in your life or whatever that happens to be. And I'm going to go look that book up because it sounds awesome. One thing I also think I keep a gratitude journal. I have since like I actually hit 10,000 things, but it's been going on for like 13 years. And I did a podcast on that earlier in the summer, but gratitude, looking at those wins can actually change the way you think. And so it will just completely, it can really change. I say that, sorry, my phone went off. So I was like, oh, I can't think. Anyway, it can change the way you think just by recognizing the good things that are really going on in your life. So
No, I love the gratitude journal. That's part of my daily journaling is I always will write down a few things that I'm grateful for. And that's a great way to get kids started on it is just, okay, let's do a gratitude journal. Let's, an easy way to do it. And they can start by just drawing pictures of what they're grateful for. And then you could, be a scribe and write down what it is after they tell you. So yeah, no, I love that.
that's so good. Well, if people want to like reach out to you or learn more about what y'all do, where should they go?
Well, the lemmy-u.com website is a great place to start. If they would like to ask me a question specifically, they can email me at heidi@lemmyhomeschool.com.
Okay. And wherever y'all are listening to this, we'll have this in the show notes below, links to that. And I know you also have, I think, a Facebook and YouTube channel
Yep.
that we can also link up there as well. And so y'all can learn more about leadership education and how that could help you as well. Heidi, thank you so much for spending time with us. Is there anything you'd like to say in closing?
I would love to encourage people to take the time, stop and see the genius in your kids. It really, I call it a genius paradigm. And it's not just your kids, it's your spouse, your friends, the people you work with. And having that genius paradigm just really can change the world because you can see how one person, it might not be the right spot for somebody to do something, but they are a genius at something else, and you can give them grace. And I have just seen so much, and that's what leadership education is all about, is seeing the amazing qualities in everybody and having the grace to, you know, let them shine in their own path. So
Well, that is awesome. Well, thank you so much. And carving out time to be with us today. I really appreciate it.
my
And this is
pleasure.
Carrie Beck with Homeschool Coffee Break. We'll talk to you next time.